Your unique story, our global audience. Global One Media.
Welcome, everyone, to Global One Media's exclusive one-on-one discussions with executives as they share insights into their company. This is a platform to help investors make informed decisions. I'm your host, Ashley Berry, and today we're welcoming Giulio Bonifacio, Executive Chair and Director of ATCU. The company is focused on the development of its 100% owned advanced stage copper project in Peru. They're listed on the TSX as ATCU and on the OTCQB as DNCUF. Giulio, welcome.
Thank you, Ashley. Good to see you again.
Sure. I'd like to start by saying you have a truly impressive portfolio of exploration properties in Peru and Canada. Perhaps you can describe for our viewers these projects and share what motivated the company to invest in them.
It gets back to the history of the company. It's been in existence for a number of years. And so we've picked up some projects earlier on that from an exploration standpoint, look awfully attractive. There's interest from certain other incoming groups of size to do joint ventures on the various projects. So being that our primary focus is Cañariaco, we're likely going to look at that form of the transaction. Again, there's past drilling that looks, very, very favorable. It does in each case warrant additional capital. But our primary source of capital and focus for capital is going to be our primary asset, Cañariaco. But when you look at Canariaco, you look at ATCU, and you look at a project in British Columbia called Canyon Creek, from a pure exploration standpoint, three very, very attractive projects that arguably could be standalone within any exploration company. So we've been very cautious about the type of transactions we would entertain, but in each instance, there's a good level of interest, and you'll likely see us do something on one or all of those projects in the coming months. And it's really to take advantage of the geological potential. And, when you look at when these projects were acquired, and, in one case, ATCU, it was in 2005, 2006. You look at Canariaco, there's an existing agreement on Canariaco where they have to make cumulative payments of $500,000 US and drill 10,000 meters before 2005, or by the end of 2005, excuse me. If they fail to do that, they have to make a substantial payment. We maintain a royalty. We'll see how that company does, but we're more than happy to get that project back and look at other opportunities that present similar type structures that allow other folks to spend their money on these projects. But the one thing that we'd like to do, and capital permitting, is in some cases we might advance these projects on our own, but want to be as flexible as we can as it relates to the portfolio, because it's again a very, very attractive portfolio of assets.
Absolutely understandable. We look forward to following you on those multiple journeys. You mentioned the Cañariaco Norte project. Perhaps you could elaborate on the specific characteristics of this project that justify the allocation of resources.
Yeah, I'd love to. And it gets back to why I initially became a shareholder of ATCU. Being someone that understands the copper space, my past two copper transactions, did reasonably well. Advance those companies appropriately as you'd expect me to be able to do. Always looked at the project in terms of its sheer size, and when you talk about what the resource looks like, it's 14 billion pounds of copper, 4 million ounces of gold, 90 million ounces of silver, copper equivalent total 16.6 billion pounds. The economics on it are fantastic. The margins are very, very good. It's it's C1 cost or the $1.25 range, and so we put out a set of economics back in 2011, a pre-feasibility study that was very robust. Attempted to move it forward, but then the markets did what they did. Copper prices collapsed to $2 a pound. They're currently at $3.50. We think that the copper prices will continue to rise here over a period of time. But with that said, we put a recent economic study out last year that looked at a smaller project advancing to a larger project, staged build from 40,000 tons to 80,000 tons. And that looked at producing on average 200 million pounds of copper per year. Economics were very, very, very favorable. At a 350 copper generated an NPV of $1 billion against a capital of $1 billion. And then if copper prices went higher, it would go significantly higher than that. So a lot of leverage to copper price. But, the mere fact that the project has had a limited amount of drilling with nothing but success, 85,000 meters to, generate a resource of, 16.6 billion pounds of copper, most of which is in the measured and indicated category, speaks volumes. The mere fact that we could readily move it to feasibility study and start the process. I think it is of great interest to me as an investor and also as the executive chair. And the incoming groups, the recent interest that's been shown by Fortescue Metals, it's a $60 billion company. They've got a 25% interest in the company. That's something that should be looked at very seriously. And then recently we entered into a financing at a 30% premium to market with a company called Whittle Consulting. And they're well known in the space to go into projects and optimize, and they wanted to take equity in the company. They think it's a tier 1 asset, top 10 asset. There's work to be done. The only real negatives on the project, not negatives, and I don't think they're negatives, is everyone has a view, but community is an area that we have to focus in on. We don't see that being an issue. That really gets back to the company not having much capital over the last number of years, and now we're re-engaged with the community. We want to demonstrate to them that they're a stakeholder in the benefits of the project and what ultimately happens. And so you'll start to see us make gains on that front, and also want to re-engage on the drilling side of the equation. But that's kind of arguably why the primary focus is Cañariaco. I mean, it's already got size, it's got substance to, replicate the work that's been done, the studies, the drilling. You're probably encroaching, north of $150 million US. Our market cap currently is about 50 million, which is pretty modest on a relative basis. My intent is to bridge that gap pretty quickly here over the next number of months, and get out there and convey the opportunity. But also because the project's got size and can produce an annual amount of copper that is very significant, in north of 300 million pounds or 150,000 tonnes of copper. Have the various discussions with certain strategic groups, inclusive of Fortescue, about how a project like this should be advanced and moved to production. And we think that we can do all of the above, and focus in on the things that we can do well, and execute that plan in a very systematic way over the coming months.
Yeah, it all sounds really promising. And you know what, Giulio, I'm really glad that you mentioned the community and the fact that you are making a conscious effort to really engage the community, because I can imagine that is incredibly important as you work there. In regards to your exploration program for the property, maybe you could detail the progress you've made so far and the subsequent steps planned ahead. Additionally, do you have sufficient liquidity to sustain the financial demands of your exploration program there?
Well, the first order of business was, we did that financing at the beginning of the year that gave us enough capital to focus in on the community, which we've done. We've opened up community offices, hired locals to oversee, and speak very freely about what we intend to do as a company on a go-forward basis. We also wanted to put back in place our drill permits, and that will take a number of months. We expect to get that by the end of the year. So we've got more than ample liquidity to execute the plan. We will be coming out with an optimized preliminary economic assessment within the next 4 to 5 months. That'll show you how robust the project is. And in fact, it'll build upon what we did last year, but be that much more robust in terms of the net numbers. So we'll all finance from a liquidity perspective, but if we and when we want to start drilling, we'll have to execute some sort of capital fund raising effort, be it equity, a royalty sale, or some other opportunity. But there's a good level of interest, but we don't have to deal with that until later in the year, which is a key point. And there's just been a good level of interest by a lot of groups, albeit context of the capital markets a bit more challenging these days than it has been. But I think everyone appreciates it. When you look at critical metals, you look at the use of copper worldwide, you look at the EV thematic, you look at decarbonization. It all consumes copper, from solar to wind to electric vehicles. And so if anything, that's going to just add a further strain to the supply side. And here we're sitting on one of the bigger, better projects worldwide in an area that is prolific for mining, and that's not going to change. And so it's kind of communicating that appropriately to certain incoming groups, strategic and otherwise. And it is a multi-billion-dollar project. And fortunately, sitting within a company that has turned the page, and we're now to the next stage of development of the company, and with what we have in hand, and again, understanding the space well enough to replicate the effort is not a simple thing to do. It's just not. It's not. When we spoke about our exploration assets earlier on, those are interesting assets, but to get to where we're at with Cañariaco, that would take a substantive amount of capital. So, I think we have a leg up. We both have the exploration upside on those other projects in terms of how we can create a liquidity event of some types or monetize value. But, with Cañariaco itself, we're well advanced to really have concrete discussions with serious groups. And I think that's been clearly demonstrated by the support that we've received from our big shareholder. I mean, that's been ongoing, and I think that should be looked at in a very serious way.
Well, communication is key, absolutely. And of course, we really appreciate your transparency here and joining us and sort of giving people an eye into exactly what's happening, opening up the aperture for your company. Any final thoughts for current and perhaps potential shareholders, investors to be aware of regarding your projects? Any particular catalysts that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I think the most significant catalyst, first and foremost, is the updated technical study that is going to be built upon previous studies. So it's going to be at the highest of standards, and you've got two fantastic groups that are leading the charge, being Whittle Consulting and OTCQB. And OTCQB's done much work in Peru, so well versed in the area. They did the previous study for us, and the ongoing effort that we're having with the community to demonstrate that, hey, there's an ability to move it forward. Just going back on some of the history, one of the comments I got back was, there was a protest on the project in 2012. Well, that, number one, was 10 years ago. It was an illegal protest, and we shortly thereafter got our community agreement. And so do we think we can put that in place again? And you need to have that in place before you can start drilling. You'll start to see our ability to move those things forward appropriately. But do bear in mind that the opportunity is that the fact that the company has done a lot of good things, but has been relatively inactive in terms of the work at the community level. That's changing. Inactive on the drilling side, and that, I think, gives rise to what will be a considerable value add for most shareholders that we started on that program. But the most important catalyst, without fail, and it's upcoming, is this technical study that's being put forth, 43-101 preliminary economic assessment. But it's at a very high standard because the base of work that's been done, bearing in mind that we've already completed a pre-feasibility study a number of years ago. You're building upon that, and you want to ensure that we do it to the highest standard from an environmental perspective as well, and social and governance. And so making lots of gains on that end. And I think the next 6 months will be very, very interesting. It creates a very, very interesting, and it'll create what should be a very good buying opportunity for those investors. But follow what we do, and appreciate that there's been many, many changes that have been put in place, all of which lead to, in my estimation anyway, a higher valuation.
Terrific. Well, Giulio Bonifacio, Executive Chair and Director of ATCU, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for joining us. And we look forward to sharing more exciting updates and many things that you've touched on and some of those teasers with our audience.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time you've taken today as well.